Hello again, BookTube. It's Mike from Riff Raff's Reading Renaissance, and today I want to do a tag. It's the Get to Know My Tastes tag, which was created originally by My Name is Marinas, and I was tagged by Angelina at Books Do Things to Me. There are a whole raft of questions, so let's dive straight in. Question 1. How do you rate books? Give a quick rundown on how you do your star ratings. If you don't use star ratings, how you evaluate books. Okay, I don't do star ratings. I don't do formal ratings at all. I evaluate books on how they make me feel and whether the language sings to me. And if you don't know what that means, I'll randomly pick up Madame Bovary, not very randomly, and I will read you a passage where the literature, the words on the page sing to me, and you'll know exactly what I mean. Emma never stopped to wonder whether she loved him. In her view, love was always arrived suddenly, accompanied by claps of thunder and bolts of lightning, a storm from heaven that bursts over your life, turns it upside down, scatters your intentions like leaves, sweeps your heart into the abyss. She didn't realize that when the gutters are blocked, the rain makes pools of water on the terrace of a house, so she was living it in perfect peace of mind when suddenly she found a crack in the wall. That kind of writing is what makes me excited about literature, and that's how I rate books. Do they do that to me? Do they either grab me or stop me in my tracks or make me feel something very special? Question 2. How do you approach reviewing books? What's your review style? Are you analytical, emotional, casual, or structured? I'm entirely casual and emotional. I'm not formally qualified to review books. I respect those who are. I don't have the language or skills to formally analyze and review books. I focus on what the book actually did, how it made me feel, whether the language sang to me like music, and whether I want others to know about it, whether I'm excited to tell other people about it. To give you an example of what I mean by a book and writing that really gets me excited, I'd like to quote something from James Baldwin's short story, Sonny's Blues, which is about a musician. This, in my view, is probably the best writing I've ever seen trying to describe the actual act of being a musician and generating music. And as a musician, this is very personal to me. But let me read you how Baldwin captures the essence of that process. All I know about music is that not many people ever really hear it. And even then, on the rare occasions when something opens within and the music enters, what we mainly hear or hear corroborated are personal, private, vanishing evocations. But the man who creates the music is hearing something else, is dealing with the roar rising from the void and imposing order on it as it hits the air. What is evoked in him then is of another order, more terrible because it has no words, and triumphant too for that same reason. And his triumph, when he triumphs, is ours. I think that is the most beautiful writing on the art of actually creating music that I've ever read. So that's when I know I've got a good book. Question 3. What's the book that made you a reader? Whether it was your favorite, one that got you hooked, the book that started it all. Well, as I've mentioned before on this channel, my mother was an English teacher and my grandmother was the city librarian. So I had no chance. I was going to be a reader one way or the other. But I guess it was in fact Winnie the Pooh that was probably the first book that I can certainly consciously remember getting into. But can I emphasize Winnie the Pooh before Walt Disney got hold of him, as you can see from this old edition. Winnie the Pooh with the original in illustrations by E.W. Shepard, not the more mass market Winnie the Pooh that we now experience. I'm nothing against it, I'm just making the slight distinction, because there are a lot of those distinctions. I met Alice in Wonderland before Disney did, I met Winnie the Pooh before Disney did, and I've always been very grateful for that. Question 4. Do you have a genre niche? Are there certain genres you gravitate towards or read widely across genres? No, I don't think of literature at all in terms of genres. I just think about whether the book calls out to me and makes me want to read it. I'm very mindful of what Oscar Wilde is reputed to have said when asked about the morality of books. He said, no, there are only two types of books, those that are well written and those that are badly written. That's the only difference. And I have to say, I tend to agree with that. I don't think in genres at all. I only think in genres when people ask me about genres. And by the way, that's the same in music. I think genres in music are largely created to help the record store owner sort his stock. I think listeners and artists cross genre boundaries all the time, and the boundaries themselves are a bit loosely defined. Question 5. Do you generally prefer character-driven or plot-driven stories? Look, I love a good plot line, but life and literature's characters are so endlessly fascinating that's, I think, where my preference lies. Characters with their perfect imperfections, as I call them, are endlessly interesting. And I think a good author will paint you a picture of a person that is just intriguing and endlessly satisfying. Question 6. A book you love so much that you don't care if others don't like it, and that you love enough for everyone. I've mentioned this book before. I'm going to do it again because I think it needs the shout out. It's a South African author, Damon Galgut's book, The Promise. It's a brilliant book with prose that takes risks and somehow captures the indefinable element of living in post-apartheid South Africa. I'm just going to refer to some of the notes I wrote because I actually wrote a review of this book for Amazon. That's how strongly I felt. And I rather than try and rehash in my head what I said, I'll steal from the screen in front of me some of the things I said. I said, what lifts this novel into a class of its own, one rightly recognized by the 2021 Booker Prize, is the writing style where our narrator shifts from first to third person, even within the confined space of a single sentence, even breaking the fourth wall to engage directly with the reader. Equally, within a phrase or two, one has relocated from one character in a location to another in a separate setting, almost without pausing for breath. These slightly unnerving changeabilities in style and setting emulate brilliantly the uniqueness of daily life in South Africa, where the next events are seemingly in the hands of unseen undercurrents that pull the protagonists in different directions. I cannot recommend this book enough, other than to show you that sitting on my desk right now is not one, but 2 copies. I'm constantly buying copies of this book to give to people who haven't read it because they should. It's really, if you want to know a little bit more about the weird reality of living in South Africa, this is a fantastic book to get into it. Okay, question 7. What's a book you love so much that if someone doesn't like it, you know their reading tastes don't align? Okay, I must admit, I believe each to his own. The only thing that would be an alarm bell for me was someone who had a problem with something general like the classics or old books. And I have to say, when I'm meeting new readers, I want to make sure that they're not just about science fiction and fantasy. If there's nothing there but science fiction and fantasy, I think we're on rocky ground. Other than that, it's each to his own. Question 8. What's in your trash pocket? What books, tropes, themes do you know are bad, but you love them anyway? Well, here I would refer you to my recently posted 4 weekly videos for GarbAugust. GarbAugust was an interesting experience for me, and I ended up selecting, let us say, shocking books rather than rubbish books. And most of the ones I chose were actually quite well written and worthy of the time I spent on them. So if you want to get a feel for what I like, go check out the GarbAugust selections. Question 9 says, do you have any deal breakers in books? Something that, if present, immediately turns you off from a book? No. Having grown up in a country that imposed severe censorship in order to try and control the thinking of the populace, I have a very, very strong bias against any such restriction or any absolutes. I'm extremely open-minded, so no limits to subject matter, but the quality of the writing is perhaps a deal breaker for me. The author has to keep me engaged. I'm very flexible on the subject. I'm very flexible on the style. We can go anywhere you like, but the quality of the writing needs to be there to keep me on board. Question 10. What's a strong opinion you have about a book that's been released within the last year, whether it's overrated, underrated, or just a take you need to share? I'd actually like to reference two books here. One is a book that really blew my mind, and that's a book called Determined by Robert Sopolsky. I just want to check. I assume it was published. Yeah, okay, it says 2023. I'm going to sneak that in as qualifying. This book is called Determined, Life Without Free Will. And that does sound, in fact, like a mind-blowing concept. Simply put, and it's a dense book, so it's quite a serious read, but simply put, the author argues that free will doesn't exist, as the brain reacts to pre-programmed experience based on what has happened to the human, and that reaction is quicker and precedes any brain logic that would try to apply morality or ethics in terms of how they react to a situation. So taking in the cumulative effect of all experiences the humans had from pre-birth right up to the moment of the instance we're talking about, the book argues, and it argues quite convincingly and from a scientific point of view, that your brain has stored all this experience, and your reactions are driven by that experience and not by a cognitive process. The measurements he has done in terms of the technical way that they measure brain activity, he claims is proving that the thing that triggers your action is not a conscious brain processed choice, but entirely reactive based on life experience. It is a mind-blowing proposition, because if he's right and there's no such thing as free will, then a lot of the rules of society simply start becoming moot. So, big discussion, perhaps bigger than a question on a tag. But I thought I'd mention it because it was certainly a book that was well written, well argued, and certainly made me think hard. The second book I want to talk about under strong opinions is a book called And the Roots of Rhythm Remain by Joe Boyd. Now, I could probably do a long video on this, which I'm not going to, because, again, with my love of music, And the Roots of Rhythm Remain is a long-awaited history. It's a big book. It's a long-awaited history of world music and how world music has influenced Western music. Joe Boyd is a very respected record producer, and he has been praised. I mean, if I simply look at the back cover of this book, you'll get people like Ry Cooder, a very well-known musical pioneer, saying one only hopes that this will be taught in schools. And Brian Eno, who was part of Roxy Music, says, "What an amazing book. I doubt I'll ever read a better account of the history and sociology of popular music than this one." The description formally, for those who are interested, is how music from across the globe has been interwoven over the centuries is fundamental to how our world sounds. The stories in this book show how unstoppable music is, how heedless of oceans and borders. On the front here, you can see Robert Plant from Led Zeppelin says, "Profound and beyond." The title of the book, And the Roots of Rhythm Remain, is a lifting of a lyric from a Paul Simon song called Under African Skies from the Graceland album, if anyone's interested. And I'll leave a link below you where you can enjoy that song later. But the reason I wanted to raise this book and talk about it as an example is it's the kind of book, I buy a lot of my books secondhand, and I try to be sensible about the amount of money that's spent on books. But once in a while, a book will come along that one simply needs to own. And for a musician like me, this litany of the story of world music and how it influenced Western music is a must-have. But the reason I actually wanted to raise this under the question of strong opinions is not the wonderful content of the book and the fact that I'm extremely glad to own it, but I want to talk about the cost of acquiring this book. So I went online to order this book. And that's where my strong opinion comes in. The book is published in the UK, and it's published at a price in the UK, I'm just consulting my notes here, of £30, which for a thick hardcover, all of 900 odd pages, is the going rate, £30. Okay. If I then do a comparison as to the price of acquiring this book in the UK, it's pretty much £30 with free delivery from Amazon or one of those services. In the US, because of the greater markets, the price of the book on average is cheaper. So then I got thinking, okay, how does this compare in South Africa, etc.? So I really did a little bit of an exercise, and I'm going to put the book down because it's a heavy chunker. But if I convert everything into dollars so that we're all talking the same exercise, the three markets I looked at were the US, the UK, and South Africa. And I'll put a little chart up here to help you keep track. If we talk about the fact that the US, and don't shoot me if my numbers are close but not perfect, the US has a population of about 334 million, according to my sources. The US has 68 million, and South Africa has 60 million. So we're roughly of a size with the UK. But the big differences start. In the US, 75% of the population buy books. In the UK, same. In South Africa, 10%. Which means that your buying population in the US is 250 million, UK is 50 million, and in South Africa, 6 million. What that means is that you have economies of scale, biggest in the US, sizable in the UK, and quite substantially smaller where I live in South Africa. That obviously affects the economics of the whole thing. But over and above that, you have the fact that in the bigger two countries of the US and the UK, you have arrangements with Amazon whereby the shipping is almost invariably free to your door, and there's no further imposition of taxes on the product, although I do understand that local sales taxes would be applied in certain American states. The UK does not tax reading, as they say. They don't tax books at all. South Africa has a VAT rate, general sales tax or value-added tax rate, of 15%, which gets added to all books, despite the fact that you'd think we needed to encourage literacy and reading. On top of that, there's a further 7% import tax, and then probably 20% roughly for shipping the book from overseas. This is for a book of the nature of the one we're talking about, which is not generally available locally because there isn't the demand locally. And by the time you do the arithmetic and you add these things up, if we talk in comparable US dollars, the British book or the British consumer, the British reader, would be out of pocket $40. The American would pay $37 for the same book, and the South African pays $60 for the same book. It's a fantastic book. I'm not picking on the book. I'm making a point. And that's because I was asked in the question about a strong opinion about a subject relating to books. I think that is a strong opinion. I feel very strongly that something is not right here, and we ought to be able to do something in a country that needs to encourage literacy and reading. That does not make sense. Okay, my rant is over. I will go back to my usual cheerful self with question 11, which says, what do you look for in writing? What makes a book stand out? Is it prose, style, themes, voice, structure, or something else? Again, I've alluded to it earlier, but it's basically writing that speaks to my soul or that stops me in my tracks with its sheer power or beauty. The only other thing that keeps me enthralled by a book is if I'm really learning something that I didn't know. And I think there's a book coming up that I'm going to talk about where that is the case. Question 12. How do you decide what to read next? Do you plan ahead? Do you mood read? External hype, recommendations, arcs, etc.? I am a mood reader. I can swing from one to another type of book. I never know quite what I feel like next. I do have to plan a little bit, because when I look at the TBR, and if you don't believe me, just look behind me, I do get a little bit stressed about the question. Steve Donahue always reminds us how little time we have left on the planet to read, and how many books there are, and how many we're not going to get to. And because of that, I don't like the feeling of finishing a book and then wasting time between that event and starting another one, dilly-dallying, thinking, I wonder what I feel like reading. So I do try, as I approach the end of a book, I do try to think ahead and say, what's next in the list, so that you don't waste any time in trying to get through all the good stuff that's there that you desperately want to get through in the time remaining. Sounds a bit morbid, doesn't it? Okay. Question 13. Where do you get inspiration for BookTube content? What sparks your ideas? Is it others, trends, personal reading? I think for me, it's mainly my own reading experience, because that's really why I started the channel. I decided to take reading it much more seriously than I had in the past. Reading had always been something I did in my spare time, and I decided to make it a bit of a front and center activity. And that sort of sparks what I want to talk about. And I was delighted to find the YouTube community, the BookTube community. And I have to say, they have been incredibly welcoming. Everybody says so, but it really is true. And that has been a revelation for me. And of course, within that community, there are processes like events, Shaketember, Shorty September, and tags. And those things, of course, do nudge the new booktuber to make videos about aspects of reading or aspects of their own personality that they might not have come up with on their own. But I often think these tags, much like this one, are really just an excuse to get to know each other in this community better, and they serve the purpose fantastically. So yeah, I have nothing but gratitude for BookTube and all that it offers. Question 14. If you could make a book go viral right now, what would it be? A book that you think deserves more attention, and why? I mentioned just a second ago books where it's not so much the quality of the writing, but what you learn from the book. And I want to cite this book called Prisoners of Geography by Tim Marshall. It describes itself on the front as 10 maps that tell you everything you need to know about global politics. This is a relatively short book. It is 314 pages. What it is an analysis. Well, perhaps let me read from the back, because I think they do a better job than I will in terms of describing what's in this astounding book. All leaders are constrained by geography. Their choices are limited by mountains, rivers, seas, and concrete. Yes, to follow world events, you need to understand people, ideas, and movements. But if you don't know the geography, you'll never have the full picture. If you've ever wondered why Putin is so obsessed with Crimea, why the US was destined to become a global superpower, or why China's power base continues to expand ever outwards, the answers are all here. Prisoners of Geography looks at the past, the present, and the future to offer an essential insight into one of the major factors that determines world history. It's time to put the geo back into geopolitics. And I have to say, it's a fascinating read. Tim Marshall is, I think, a BBC reporter who's taken his experience from being on the road into a book. The book has lovely maps of each area. If I just turn to the initial chapters, it's a very functional chapter list. I'm sure you can see that if I hold it up close. Basically, if it's not clear, all areas of the world are tackled in a roughly urgency order, I would think. Number one, Russia, then China, then the US, then Western Europe, Africa, the Middle East, India and Pakistan, Korea and Japan, Latin America, and the Arctic. And I have to say, this was a book that simply left me wiser than when I started. A lot of the conundrums that you see in the daily news and the headlines, you think, what on earth is going on? Why is this happening? This book explains a lot about the realities and how the physical geography of the world and where we each live in our corners of the world impacts what happens to us and the forces of politics and all of those challenges. It's a completely revelatory read, and I think it hasn't got the attention. I think it's done well. It says on the front, the phenomenal #1 Sunday Times bestseller, so I'm sure it's doing all right, but I think everybody should read it. I think school kids should have to read this so they go out into the world wiser than they might otherwise be. Finally, question 15 is, who are some booktubers with reading tastes similar to yours? I don't know about reading tastes similar to mine. I suppose I'd rather think about the booktubers that I find the most rewarding to watch and watch repeatedly are ones who have a similar approach to reading. And that to me is less about genre, less about specific style, but more about the quality of what's being read. Again, I'm not big on fantasy. I'm not big on science fiction. A lot of it is backdated literary classics. I'm fully happy to read new stuff as long as it's really good. I've given you some examples of recent stuff here tonight. So instead of trying to rattle off names from my head and offending those I leave out, I think I'll put the my preferred list of recommended starter pack, if you like, of booktubers that I love watching. I'll put that in the notes so that you can click and check them all out individually rather than simply me rattling them off now, at the risk of leaving out one or two that are extremely special to me. But suffice to say that I am deeply grateful to all of them who do it, and I try and watch as many of them as I can, and they enrich my life greatly, and I hope that I get in some way to do the same back to the BookTube community. So that's the tag. Thank you very much for staying with me on this part of the journey. I hope you enjoyed it. And before I sign off, I must ask you to do the usual like and subscribe stuff over here that we're supposed to remember to do, and we nearly always don't. And having said that, thank you very much for sharing my journey so far. I hope you'll stay along with me for the future. Thanks very much, and bye-bye till the next time. Bye-bye.